Hi, I'm Swank Butler, and welcome to Down Chancery's Lane. The annals of jazz history are full of legendary British players, from Stan Tracy through to Kenny Ball, but perhaps none are more revered than British pianist Dick Chancery. Blind from birth, he left his native Battersea, England, to conquer New York and eventually the world with his swinging bop style of playing. I'm delighted to have caught up with him today to hear some of his stories, which stem from a very exciting musical life. He's right in here. So Dick, it's good to see you again.
It's good to see you too, Swank.
Now I wondered if today we might talk a little about your time in America, when the pop business pretty much overtook and, to all extents and purposes...
Oh, it did.
To all extents and purposes, killed jazz music and buried it in all its finery. What do you remember about that time?
Very well. It was the fall of 1963, and the nation was in a state of absolute anarchy due to the assassination of
President Kennedy?
Of Mac the Knife by Louis Armstrong. A very talented man in his own right, but he had no call in massacring that song the way he did. It was a great piece of opera, actually, by Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill.
Vile.
Oh, it was, Swank, it was. And although it reached #1 in the Billboard parade, even knocking the Fab Four off the top spot, it put another coffin in the nail of jazz, pure jazz, if you will, of which I was probably the finest component at the time.
Exponent?
Yeah, that as well.
So what you're saying, in essence, is that jazz had sold out to the commercial market once too often and got a bad rep.
In a way, there were still some very interesting people doing individual work. People like Miles Davis, Ornette Coleman, Shabba Ranks, Dave Brubeck and so on, but that didn't really count.
Why not?
Well, it was all a load of crap, really.
And what steps did you take in the circumstances?
Oh, I did a mixture. I dabbled, as it were, but stayed true to my own roots. Now, at the time, the guy you mentioned,
Who?
The guy who had his hat blown off.
Oh, President Kennedy?
Yeah, that cat. Well, Kennedy, very interesting this, actually, the whole business with Kennedy. I didn't talk about it at the time for obvious reasons, but now I don't suppose it matters that much. Do you think?
Well, I don't know.
No, I suppose. Well, I became somewhat embroiled in that matter and had to lie low for a number of months.
Really? And why was that?
Well, you see, I knew who it was who actually did the shooting. He was never caught, you know. They blamed some other guy, Oswald something. But I knew who it was. I saw him do it. And he hid in my bed for weeks until the heat died off.
And who was it?
Well, actually, it was a dude by the name of Francis Albert...
Sinatra?
That's the one. He didn't actually do the deed. No, he got another guy to do that, some coloured fella. Sammy Jr., while Peter Lawford kept watch.
I don't believe it.
No one did. That was the beauty of the scheme. I didn't even believe it myself until I got the patter right and people started to swallow. After the individuals involved were all in their graves, of course.
Well, what about Peter Lawford, for example? Wasn't he filled with guilt and remorse over the killing and ended up drinking himself to death over it? I mean, why would he be involved?
Exactly. Why did he feel so guilty? Such remorse?
I see. Well, quite a scoop.
But anyway, let's talk about happier times.
If you wish. Such as?
World War II. What a time that was. Music in the underground, song in the air. Beautiful.
But surely you wouldn't have been around at that time.
Oh, I was, very much so. But that was back in the 1940s, of course, before I even became a blind act. You see, it wasn't, well, fashionable back in those times. They often believed that any affliction of any kind was a punishment from God, and it did very badly for you. Affected your gig diary terribly.
Did you serve in any of the armed services?
No. What, with these eyes? I was a mere boy anyway. I used the time to master my art.
The piano?
Well, at the time it was stealing ration books, but there wasn't much future in that, so I switched to the Joanna.
But it wasn't until the 1960s that you became an established figure on the jazz circuit, and until the latter end of the decade that you became a star.
Oh, but I served my apprenticeship. All through the war years and into the 50s, I did a lot of cruise work.
Fascinating. And then during the mid-60s, with jazz at its lowest ebb, you rose up and became a phoenix from the ashes, as it were, going on to compose film soundtracks, tour the world, and produce several wonderful albums. And of course, your hit record, Blue Rose. I wondered if you might give us a rendition of it today.
Well, if you'd really like to hear it, Swank, it would be a pleasure for me to play it. Yeah, I've been playing this song for 40 years now. And that was my big hit of the 1970s.
Wonderful. It still seems fresh after all these years.
Yes, that's right. About 1969 I wrote that. About the time I was approached and asked to join a band called the Iron Hoofs. 3 young boy singers who were, well, they were really quite good and 3 of the most attractive sounding lads you could hope to meet.
And that was when you started to steer away from your jazz roots and try some more experimental things, such as your musical Follicles, with the entire cast famously stripped and performed naked.
That was a fun time. Hearing all those naked bodies up there on the stage night after night. Oh, well, it beats working, eh?
Sure. And the hit from that show was, of course...
Well, of course.
It was...
The Age of Sagittarius. It's a little far out there, but that was the style of things at the time. When we opened, there was furore. I wanted scandal. That's why I persuaded them to get their kits off.
Well, I see your point.
Indeed. And I saw theirs.
We'll be right back.